Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this week's Skwawk Talk. Should be a very interesting program this week, I think, and I'm delighted to welcome my guests working in anti-clockwise direction on my screen. We've got Nicholas, who's an NHS campaigner. I have the famed Dr. Kailash Chand. We have Bonnie Ash. We have Unite's Howard Beckett, and we have Alan Gibbons from my adopted home city of Liverpool. Welcome, everybody. Should be an interesting week. I've got two main topics for this evening. One is the reinstatement of suspended Labour members who were suspended as part of Keir Starmer and David Evans's war on free speech within the party. And we've also seen Boris Johnson claim that he's going to reform the NHS. That's a very dangerous word in a Tory mouth. And we're going to look into what that really means, because as you'd expect, it's a bit of a scam and not really what the media will be presenting. So let's kick off on the reinstatements. Alan, you've recently, as in the last couple of days, been readmitted to the party. Tell us a little bit about the circumstances of your suspension and then about coming back in.
Yeah, November the 19th, I moved a resolution in solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn, calling for him to have the whip returned, for the reinstatement of suspended socialists and for the defence of Labour Party democracy. For that, I received a suspension for a month. I didn't know the exact reasons, whether there was any other material, but it turned out it was just on that motion. And yesterday I received a letter saying that I had breached Rule 218, which is, it's kind of a bit of a catch-all thing, but that I was being reinstated. They'd taken into cognizance Article 10 of the Human Rights Act on free speech. And I was going to get a statement of values that would last for the next year on my record. And as I've always said, my values are elect a Labour government to carry through major reforms. We deliver 84.7% for Dan Carden at the last election. We will always be at the heart of all the food banks and the homelessness street teams across the city. We campaign for the NHS. We had a march of 600 trade unions and socialists to commemorate Robert Tressel. We hold an annual Eric Heffer commemoration, which is to sustain our socialist values. And I think on that basis, my values are firmly Labour and socialist. And I'm standing for the council, and I will endeavour to work heart and soul for my working class community of Warbreck.
How very dare you! And you're not on your own in having been in that circumstance, because there's been a wide array of officers from CLPs around the country, most notably I think in Bristol, who've been getting hammered in similar fashion for daring to allow members to discuss stuff that members wanted to discuss, in short. Yeah,
I think there's around 70 of us all together. The Southwest is the region with the most people. What's concerning is the possibility of reselection before a verdict on their cases for several comrades down there. And I hope that this verdict that myself and another comrade have had over the weekend means that good socialists will be readmitted so they can get out and become councillors and campaign for a transformative Labour government. I mean, this is what we want. The last thing I wanted was to have to go onto platforms arguing legal cases. I don't want to see divisiveness. I want us all to turn our fire on the Tories, but I mean, that has not been in my remit. I mean, I've done what my conscience told me and what members in Walton kept telling me. So I think we'll move on from this verdict, and we really, fight for change. That's all what we all want to see. An end of the shambles of this Tory government that has had a catastrophic impact on public health.
Very good. Now, Howard, you and Unite have been involved in that battle to get the suspended members reinstated. What can you tell us about how that process started and where it's ended up so far?
Yeah, Steve, we put the legal team together for Alan, and obviously we've tried to offer it to as many Unite members as possible. We've been involved in this, and we've tried to get all of the various legal teams together to get a cohesive approach to this as to how people are responding. And Martin Howe, who many people will know, we put that, Martin's was the legal team that we used, for Jeremy to get on the second ballot paper as long ago as that. And we consistently used Martin for issues in the Labour Party, and it was Martin who represented Alan going forward. So there's still immense struggles, with Alan's reference to sting in the tail that was in the letter about a reminder of standards, as if he needs to be reminded by David Evans or Keir Starmer as to standards. And just referencing that, we talk about a vote of conscience and stuff, and Alan just said he followed his conscience in respect of giving solidarity to Jeremy Corbyn, and we're dealing with a leadership who described the vote in respect of the Chiz bill as not being one of conscience. So I think they could do with a few lessons around that as well. So yes, there's a bit of a sting in the tail there. We have to decide how we're going to respond to it. Shahina Jaffer, who was the other member who's been reinstated, she was also urgent. Alan was urgent because of pending elections, and Shahina was urgent for the same reasons. So both had threats of injunctions with them if the Labour Party didn't accelerate it. Shahina was reinstated, but then our CLP refused to accept her reinstatement on, I think it was Saturday night. And as a consequence, she hasn't gone forward to be re-elected as the chair of our CLP. So we'll have to look at that and take that issue up as well, Steve. And obviously, in amongst all of the suspensions that are going on, we still have the ex-leader of the Labour Party who's been subject to double jeopardy, found innocent by an NEC panel, only then to have his whip suspended by Keir Starmer, despite Keir Starmer having known exactly what it was that Jeremy was being recused for or being found innocent for, because he was more than aware of the contents of the Glue report. And we now have the disgraceful dismissal of 12 community organisers. So it seems to be that it just goes from bad to worse with this leadership.
Well, it does seem to be that that the party's hierarchy is more interested in attacking the left within the party than actually taking on the Tories, which is ironic considering the number of times they used to say that Corbyn's Labour wasn't interested in winning power. Let me bring in our other three guests on that, because I expect that you will know of other people who have been affected like this, and be hearing plenty of feedback from the grassroots of the party as well about the way that this whole fiasco is being perceived by members in the wider community.
Don't know who's coming
who
in
wants
there.
Who wants to come in? Bonnie, get a word in.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, it's ironic, isn't it, that we've had to fight for the reinstatement of good Labour Party activists at the same time that we've seen Labour Party members of staff who have been very abusive, and it's coming out through the Ford inquiry, being readmitted as well. So, it's almost like, treat socialists any way you like and you can stay in, but if you dare to be a socialist and speak out for your values, you're on thin ice.
Mm-hmm. Kailash, what are you hearing in the Manchester area? You're muted. Kailash, you're switched off, no sound. Don't worry, I'll edit this bit out.
No, Steve, I think what is going on, it's very, very sad. It's nothing short of, in my view, McCarthyism. They are literally picking up people who actually are, in my view, a true socialist, who are champions of the real causes which coming, and it's going to hurt us if we don't really try and sort of halt it now and make it and expose it, what exactly is going on. So I'm not expert on that, but my view as a lay member or a grassroots member is that it's a very sad chapter in the history of the Labour Party.
Yes. Bonnie referred to the Ford inquiry. How did Unite get involved with putting a submission into the inquiry on the goings on?
Most definitely did. I received mixed reports back from those people who've been interviewed in respect of the Ford inquiry, and some mixed feedback in respect of whether or not the leader's office thinks it's going too far, and then consequently whether or not it's actually going to do something that might be a shot in the arm for the left. Obviously, the Labour Party started a number of inquiries at the same time, so it wasn't just a Ford inquiry. They then did your own investigation into the leak, and I've got no doubt that that'll come out with certain commentary that is politically motivated. So, and then they did obviously a separate one again in respect of any employee actions. So they've had 3 bites at the cherry as far as they're concerned. So if the Ford inquiry says something that is not palatable for the leadership of the Labour Party, I've no doubt that they will reference other reports. But I would just say this, Steve, this is now, it's a campaign of fear that really is being undertaken in regard to socialists within the Labour Party, people frightened of speaking. And I'm sure Alan would reference that's the tone of the correspondence that he's received. So even though the NEC has understood that they need to back down because Article 10 and Article 11 are ones that we would take them to court on, they have nevertheless still doubled down on this language of fear and outright bullying, talking about direction and authority and subordination, language that just has no place in socialism. And add to that, and I'm sure everybody watched the weekend media, where there's this push from the right-wing media now to ask Starmer to do more. Starmer's not doing enough to attack the left. He needs to do more. He needs to have a row with Len McCluskey. He needs to out all socialism from the Labour Party. And you can just see that he's been pushed and egged on in this direction by the establishment. And you wonder whether or not he's got the political nous to realise what's happening, even if he doesn't have the socialist core to realise what's happening.
Well, I think what's been remarkable for me is the extent to which he seems to have contempt even for his own inquiry, because he set the thing up. And yet, so far, months before the inquiry has got anywhere near reporting, we saw this huge payout go to whistleblowers, as they were termed, in a case that the party expected to win, really. And now we've seen him again, pour this contempt on the Ford inquiry himself by, or at least his hierarchy has, in terms of, attacking people's free speech, reinstating people within the, who are accused under the, under the leaked report, etc. Into the party before Ford's ever reported. And if I was Mr. Ford QC, I'm sure I would be most upset at my findings being preempted and Keir Starmer jumping the gun in terms of his reactions.
Yeah,
Alan, how's that playing on the ground in Liverpool? I mean, obviously, I imagine there's been a fair amount of welcome for your reinstatement, but the people won't be ignorant of the wider situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's been overwhelming. I'll tell you one of the ironic things, and I don't like using phrases like breaks my heart, but I mean, quite a lot of members were talking about leaving the Labour Party. 1 or 2 had declared that they would. And one of the things they referenced was that people like me should belong in the Labour Party. And not just me, I mean, all of the members who have been suspended. And I mean, I shouldn't have to be arguing and putting a case to really good socialists who are at the heart of the community to come back into our party. I mean, I just find that incredibly sad. I joined in the hope of, and this is what I found, a welcoming, forward-going group of comrades who were at the heart of the community. And I think if the kind of community work that we've been doing and Broxtowe Labour Party have been doing month in, month out, had been carried out in every single constituency in the United Kingdom, we would have had Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell conducting the affairs of this country far more responsibly, far more successfully for the people of this country. And they have got the NHS beating in their chests. They're not like Boris Johnson, who we all know would like to see a privatised service. Would Matt Hancock wearing his little NHS badge when he would dearly love to see a private, insurance scheme for the wealthier and people in sink hospitals like Cook County. If you've ever seen that film, having to provide services when everything's stripped back for working class people. I want my kids to inherit a world, based upon the dream of Clement Attlee and an Iron Bevan. That's what I'm in politics for.
I don't think there's much sign of any of that kind of spirit on the Labour front bench at the moment, sadly, which kind of draws us on to the other point relating to the media this week, which is that we've started to see even Starmer's normal kind of drum bangers in the centrist establishment media making noises about he's not up to the job, he's not good enough, his time's limited, etc. People in the party people who aren't in the party or who are thinking of leaving need to bear in mind that you never know what might happen in the next few months. It could very well be if you leave, that you're missing out on a freeze date in a vital election that might put us back onto some kind of decent Labour track.
Well, yes, that is always the option, isn't it? For those who are always the thought process for those who are leaving, that are they going to miss out on the opportunity to change direction? I do think whenever we're having this sort of discussion, Steve, that it's important that we always reference back to 2017, as if, you know, people acting as if 2017 did not happen. The reason as to why society is where it is, and Alan's just hit the nail in the head, is because of the decades that we've had of ignoring communities and not being relevant to them, not offering any transformative policies that make people think that their lives can be changed for the better. And that was New Labour's mistake. It's the reason as to why Scotland is lost for Labour for at least another generation. And it's the reason why nobody is coming through in Scotland. It's the reason ultimately as to why people felt so disheartened in the Brexit debate, because they were looking at two sets of establishments, neither of which appeared to do anything for them, and all they had was an opportunity to give a vote that was intended to be a slap in the face, and they delivered it. And it will be the death knell of the Labour Party if they do not start listening to communities again and do not get back into those communities to organise. And that's why for me personally, it's so disappointing to see how they've gone on the attacks with community organisers. In the last week, 12 individuals who obviously were appointed because we all believe that socialism thrives on community organising, but people who are frankly being dismissed because they're the appointments of Jeremy Corbyn's team and therefore their faces don't fit. And of those 12, 5 are from Black and ethnic minority communities. The Labour Party is lacking in respect of proportionality all over the Labour Party, but particularly at the top of the Labour Party. We have the removal, stroke suspension of the regional director in the West Midlands, who is the only Black and ethnic minority regional director in the whole of the Labour Party, also happens to be Palestinian. We then have people being told by way of a leaked tweet from Pogrund that they're about to be dismissed, even though those people have been wholly committed to the socialist movement. No good reason given whenever there's other jobs advertised in Labour that Labour lawfully is required to allow them to, even though both Starmer and Evans are on the record with the NEC saying that they support community organising. The reason for this is obviously because they see that socialists are in the current positions and they want them replaced with people who are not socialists. And all of this has an underlying current that is simply wrong and worrying, and that is one of race, where we have had a leader who doesn't understand the Black Lives Matters movement, can't face down racism in an LBC interview. We have a leadership at the top which is overwhelmingly white and male, and we have actions being taken in the employment field that would be described as horrendous if they were being taken by a commercial employer, and they're being taken in a manner that is overwhelmingly discriminatory towards a large proportion of Black and ethnic minorities. So we really are in a dire position with Labour, and they're now acting as if they're the worst type of employer.
Don't hold back, Howard. Tell it how you think. I mean, the icing on the cake with the treatment of the community organisers was the fact that, you know, they didn't just fire them, but they then briefed against them to try and get out of the leak of the, what do you call it, suit and flag shagging report that leaked out, and they tried to blame the leak of that on the community organisers, which I thought was just appalling. But let's not forget, I mean, Keir Starmer, when he first came into the leadership, appointed a diversity panel in his office that was all white.
The refusal to listen at the people at the grassroots all the way up is reflected in the lack of diversity at the top of the Labour Party. And, you know, we've gone in just the space of 4 years since 2017 from a party, or even just since 2019, from a party that was motivated, inspired and encouraged by the grassroots who are pushing up progressive socialist policies, to a party that is completely controlled from the top down, and people daren't step out of line for fear of being suspended or losing their jobs. It's no way is this acceptable. And what we're seeing is the complete hollowing out of our party. It's almost like they want socialists to leave. And what I'm afraid of if that happens is we go back to what we experienced as activists as recently as 2015, where you'd knock on doors and canvass and be told by person after person, what is the point in voting for Labour? What do you stand for? Do you offer us anything different to what the Tories are offering us? You know, in all honesty, with the best will in the world, it was very difficult in those days to say, actually, well, vote Labour because we'll be less horrible than the Tories. It's just not, that's just not going to cut it. That's not good enough.
Now,
Yes.
I agree if I can pop in, because, I mean, take a look at our two local MPs in the north end of Liverpool. Dan Carden, I stood next to him when he was a 7-year-old kid on the Dockers picket lines. He knows this movement inside out. He knows the community inside out. He cares about North Liverpool. Ian Byrne, you know, fighting the battle on food poverty. I mean, he lives in Anfield, you know, and I mean, just, this is what all our represent. I live in Warbrek, you know, and I've done like for 30, 40 years. And I can't even remember when I moved here from Liverpool 8. But this is what our party should look like. We don't want to have people in suits parachuted in, you know. I mean, it doesn't go down well with local communities. They need to see people that actually, they see their own experiences reflected. That is really what we need to see. And that way, Labour, I think, really can recapture its heart and its soul and have a policy agenda that fits with the people of this country.
But the idea that you'll impress working class people by wearing a suit is an interesting one to me, because you know, for where I grew up in the inner city in the northeast, anybody wearing a suit was probably coming around to either arrest somebody or, you know, collect a debt or something. You know, so it wasn't that wasn't the way to appeal to the kind of natural instincts of the working class where I came from.
I went to Sayers in Notty Ash and they asked if I was a copper. I had minutes explained to these young lads, I'm not a copper, you're a social worker then. I said, come on, social workers wear jumpers and baggy jeans.
Presumably you didn't have the big beard at that point.
No, my beard was a bit short there.
It reminds me of the quote from the other Keir, you know, Keir Hardie, who made an absolute point of saying he should go to represent his people in Parliament wearing the clothes of a working man. You know, and we've moved so far from that. And, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, you shouldn't be careful about your appearance, but this suit, regardless of what fills it, is a really, really bad move politically.
The tale of two Keirs, eh? Yeah, I find it, I have to say, I find the use of the flag much more insipid and dangerous. I don't like it. I especially don't like it at a time when, you know, whenever Black Lives Matter is so important. I think it's, you know, for me, like patriotism very quickly can move to xenophobia, very quickly move to racism, and then very quickly move towards fascism. So I don't like this use of the flag. I don't like, you know, obviously from my own background, I'm not too keen on flags, but I just don't like it. It sounds as if it feels like something that is exclusive. And it feels a bit dog whistling, and I don't like what it's trying to say about working class communities, as if you have to appeal to base patriotism in order to appeal to working class communities. That's just not true. These are communities that are multicultural, recognise everybody's service to the NHS, want to thrive. You know, it was Jeremy Corbyn who said true patriotism is not wanting people living on the streets, and he was quite right.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, you know, leaving aside issues to do with kind of exclusivity of the flag, it's also a gross insult and hardly likely to appeal to the Welsh and the Scots, where Labour needs to, in one case, hang on and you know, consolidate, and then the other try to claw back some support. And you know, it reminds me a little bit, and it was a joke at the time, but it's not funny now, where somebody caught a snap of David Cameron kind of looking down his nose at Jeremy Corbyn at the cenotaph, but they'd photoshopped it so that, you know, Corbyn had one poppy on his lapel, and David Cameron had about 16 photoshopped under his jacket, as though he was determined he was going to outdo Corbyn on patriotism. And it feels like that. It feels like a parody, except it's deadly serious. Alan, you mentioned how the importance of having a proper Labour Party and a proper opposition to defending the NHS, and that's the other aspect of the show that we want to cover tonight, with the Boris Johnson's dreaded word reform with regard to how the NHS is run, and you know, it harks back to his election promise when he promised to have 40 new hospitals. And essentially, as far as I can see at the moment, it seems like it's have 40 hospitals rather than 40 new hospitals. Nick, you wanted to comment on some of the fact that a lot of this isn't actually new, and it's just a continuation with a bit of new badging, which is solving the case.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and then I might comment something on the links between party democracy, because Tony Blair said not long ago that Labour members shouldn't be trusted with policy because they're not irresponsible. Echoing Kissinger's comment about Chile and the coup, the people that you couldn't leave that to the population to decide, to make the important decisions. It's been necessary for the Labour right to shut people out who believe in the spirit of Attlee, as Alan mentioned, because they don't. And that I think is something, and it's completely linked to what we're going to talk about, but is something that's kind of been left behind in what the left has dealt with, to me, during the Corbyn era, because people remember Tony Blair, they call him the war criminal. But I think I have a quote here somewhere. Alison Pollock said she wonders how New Labour was able to convince so many it was still committed to comprehensive, universal and equal access healthcare when its policies were clearly running in the opposite direction. And the truth is Labour never really dropped the core of those policies. And it's very much relevant to what Boris Johnson is doing, because they support those policies on the whole. Yes, what's coming now is legislation, but the bulk of that we've known is legislation to rubber stamp policy that has already existed without legislation. Quite extraordinarily, things have just been done. It's de facto. And so you've had a process of telling people in prettier words that their services are going to be reduced. It's generally presented as a good thing. And Bonnie can talk to us, I'm sure, about that.
Bonnie, you've been on the receiving end of this for the past few years in terms of so-called NHS improvements that actually result in loss of access to services.
I mean, the 40 new hospitals that we were promised by Johnson are not new hospitals whatsoever. I mentioned it in a speech to conference. I think it was 2016 when I proposed a motion that got passed unanimously, but it was the spirit of it only, not the detail necessarily. But what we're seeing in southwest London is there are currently 5 fully acute hospitals, and the plan that is being pushed really, really fiercely is to downgrade to almost non-existence 2 of those fully acute hospitals, which serve 750,000 people in the local area. The acute services in those hospitals will be stripped out totally, and in exchange we'll get, Johnson referred to it as a new hospital. It isn't a new hospital. It's effectively a new wing on the side of leading cancer hospital, the Marsden. And it will have co-located resources. It will share porters, cleaners, caterers, and so on with cancer patients, with 500 fewer beds than we currently have. Which will take us down to the lowest provision in most of the developed world. We're looking at half a bed per 1,000 people of the population, which is completely unsustainable. And at the moment, the hospitals, obviously because of coronavirus, are really struggling. And it occurs to me that if this deadly plan is allowed to go forward, we'll see coronavirus patients co-located in a building with cancer patients. So it's putting seriously ill people next to clinically extremely vulnerable people, which is absolute nonsense. So we'll be the first project of this to go through in southwest London unless we can fight them off. But this is set to be repeated across the whole of England under NHS England's 5-year view or long-term plan. They keep changing the name of what they want to call it, but it's going to be coming to a hospital near you. So we really need to wake up and fight this, because we're going to lose a serious number of acute beds. We're going to lose an awful lot of experienced consultants, nurses, and other workers, cleaners, caterers, and so on. And what we're seeing, certainly where I am, is provision for healthcare services moving from the most economically deprived, ethnically diverse population to a new wing on the side of a building in probably the most salubrious part of the area that it's serving. So I think that absolutely speaks volumes about what's going on. And in order to fund these so-called new hospitals, the government have put aside £3.7 billion. Now that 3.7 billion is purely to provide seed money for PFI style funding for these new hospitals. And we all know the disaster that PFI funded hospitals cause. I mean, Alan and Steve, you'll probably be aware of the hospital in Liverpool that they had to stop building because the PFI scheme went bankrupt. And we've seen what happens when contractors such as Carillion, who've had a lot of the contracts for the renovations of existing hospitals, go bankrupt. The money just disappears, the work stops, and we're in a major difficulty. So we've got all of these things going on. And what this new move by the government to take control of the NHS, what it actually is about is removing the need to tender for contracts. Under the Health and Social Care Act 2012, the single provision, and it was tiny, to try and protect some of the publicly provided NHS, was the expectation that all contracts would have to be put out for tender. But what we're seeing now, this taking control of the NHS, what it actually means is that the Secretary of State for Health can award contracts for whatever he likes, to whoever he likes, with as much or as little experience and as much or as little value for money as they like. And we've seen this rush through under coronavirus and sort of emergency legislation when it comes to the purchasing and provision of PPE. Serco's track and trace, I will not call it the NHS track and trace app because it's Serco's track and trace app. The NHS cannot be reduced to merely a logo on someone's lapel badge. You know, this is not a pin, this is not a logo, this is a national health service. And what we as a Labour Party, as a Socialist Party, need to be doing is looking at removing NHS England, reverting to a fully publicly provided national health service, and move forward in that way.
And it sounds like it's essentially baking in the worst of the scandals that we've seen throughout the pandemic in terms of dodgy awards of contracts to the mates and donors of the Tories. Howard, the Unite's got a lot of members in the NHS. Tell us how it's affecting them and what feedback you're getting back from on the ground there.
Well, yes, it's been this move to privatisation and outsourcing, hasn't it? And, you know, you'll have seen, everybody will understand that it's workers' terms and conditions that has suffered as a result of it. And it's extraordinary that we should even be having this debate after the COVID crisis, whenever health workers have put their lives on the line for the countries. And we're having a debate about whether or not they should be directly employed and how much privatisation is coming. And obviously, Bonnie's quite right. It's not that there's going to be more privatisation. It's just going to be less competition, and so as they can feed all of their cronies and call it cronyism instead of corruption. It is what it is. But I would like to give a shout out, Steve, to the Heartlands dispute in the West Midlands, which isn't a Unite dispute. It's a unison dispute. Porters, who we clapped for in March and April, and then come December, they were being fired and rehired to be re-employed on a rota that literally means that they sleep in order to work. Absolutely disgraceful, and it's the reason why the unions are putting together coherent demands around this. Obviously, care homes need to come into the NHS. The NHS deserve the 15% pay rise that they're demanding, and we cannot have the types of practices like fire and rehire creeping into the NHS in a way that just undermines workers' terms and conditions.
Kailash, what are the doctors seeing? You're part of the BMA.
I think we are very concerned. A person like me who saw Lensley Act and fought tooth and nail, see particularly this legislation, in my view, is perhaps 10 times worse than what Lensley reforms were. Remember one thing, you see, I think Bonnie was saying about we're going to lose consultants and nurses and blah, blah, whatever. For me, it's a recipe for losing NHS. Forget about, there won't be anybody there to work for this NHS. I haven't seen the whole legislation. As a matter of fact, everybody says that and the devil is in the detail. Once those things come out, we'll know what exactly they're talking about. But what I want to really warn Labour Party is one very simple thing. I think Boris and his team is very, very clever. They are looking at 2024 election. And with what has gone on with NHS is going to be a massive so-called battleground for that election. And they want to neutralize us by giving these kind of words, no more privatization and scrapping Section 75. The truth is what they have seen in this so-called COVID pandemic, that Section 75 was obstacle. And though they take on those emergency powers, and we all know how all the contracts were given to their friends and the donors and all that, if Section 75 goes out of it, that means nothing has got to go through any tenders. And all contracts could be just given as it is, simple as that. So in a way, I think the Labour Party, the front bench, particularly Health, John Ashworth, got to look and really oppose it tooth and nail, rather than more or less rubber stamping it, saying that, yes, if something good in it, this is what we wanted, scrapping Section 575 and government's commitment for no privatization. There isn't any commitment in that paper, as far as I know, of stopping privatization. It's way taking this way, and it is a real, in my view, the last call. You remember Oliver Letwin and Jeremy Hunt, they co-authored a book in which they say, conservative governments 5 years and there'll be no NHS. I'm sure 5 years have gone now, but that 5 years now will become 10 years. And if everything goes by 2024, God forbid, if they come back to power, Tories, NHS is gone. And this is no scaremongering. This is the truth. And this is what perhaps most of the people who believe in medical politics or know medical politics know this is the way forward as far as the Tory government is concerned. They don't want to really antagonize the public by saying that we want to get rid of NHS. But just look at their roadmap. Just look what they have done since 2010 to date. It's hardly a NHS, to be honest. In this pandemic, we know 22 billion pounds of contracts were just given, just thrown away to private sector, and that too didn't deliver. Had they delivered that, still people or public perhaps would have been happy with it. Now, only thing they are trying to fool us, vaccinations being rolled out. And yes, vaccination is great. There's no doubt about that. But now people got to understand vaccination has been successful because the local GPs, the local authorities, the local social services, they are delivering it. And I think this kind of messages are not coming from the Labour Party, should come that what vaccination is doing is being done because it's being given to NHS. So I think Labour got to really get its house in order and got to make NHS perhaps a real battle force for the 2024 election and tell the public what they did in their 10 years of power, what they have done to NHS. NHS is almost a skeleton. If you look at the funding, every year, right from 1948 to date, it used to be 4% every year for the inflation, the so-called in the NHS funding. And in last 6-7 years, the average is anything around 2.1%. So in a way, in NHS, it is given that in NHS, you need funding more than inflation for various reasons, pharmaceutical and blah, blah, whatever. And if anything, it has gone down. As far as workforce is concerned, we are struggling. There are almost 100,000 vacancies. And where the things are, the morale of the profession is so down. A very recent survey done by BMA very clearly tells us that almost 1/4 doctors want to leave. 1/4 nurses wants to leave. So what's going to be left of NHS? And that's what they'll say. There is nothing left in the NHS. Let private sector do it. 4.5 million people are now waiting on the waiting list. Will there be any capacity in NHS to deliver that? And then that's all lock, stock and barrel. Those contracts again will be passed on to private sector. So it's a very dire situation. It's not scaremongering, it's the truth. And let's make that truth very visible.
Well, with the help of the media, Boris Johnson's claiming he wants to fix the Lansley Care Act, but it sounds very much like it, by fix, he means take out the parts that are inconvenient for us when we want to award money to our pals. It reminds me of that time a few years ago when the Tories tried to steal Labour's thunder on the living wage by simply rebadging the minimum wage to be called the living wage. And then, but they didn't actually really increase it to anybody in terms of giving them enough to live off, which was the whole point of the thing in the first place. Nico, you're waving a hand there. Are you want to come in?
I am, yeah. That's really waving my hand. Just a few things about all this and picking up on what Kailash was saying about capacity and how, we've had easily over half all the beds in the NHS deliberately cut over 30 years. and that's increased since. And again, Alison Pollock, I'll quote her again, pointed out that the beds given out to the, that became part of the Nightingales, temporary beds, was the equivalent number of those beds. And the big contracts out to the private sector to bring in spare capacity. Why do you need to bring in spare capacity? Oh, by coincidence, you've cut a lot of beds. Well, that's the process that's been going on for decades. And that is totally related to the system, which has got lots of names. It's called accountable care, it's called integrated care, it's called managed care. It's all sorts of names that come from the corporates that invented it. And there's been a confusion with the idea of bringing services together, holding hands and working for the public good with this thing. And this thing is from the US. It's absolutely from the US, which Johnson is going to bring in as the system in English law, plus any additions that his team has been making over the last few months. This is what the long-term plan, the 5-year forward view, it's part of what the Health and Social Care Act was doing, and it's part of what Blair did before. Alan Milburn is not just, we were talking about, very unfortunate that Labour in their election focused on, and I think it's symptomatic that they talked about a future deal with Trump and Johnson as the threat. The United States, US companies coming in, when, in fact, in 2001, Alan Milburn went to Washington and signed a bilateral agreement with Bush's Health Secretary, Tommy Thompson, which was part of ongoing arrangements between Britain and the US, which has resulted in bringing in this type of system. What this system does, it's important to know, a group of providers come together. Yes, they come together, but for what? They have a budget, and they will get a financial reward that depends on them spending less of that budget on healthcare. So they are incentivized to spend less on healthcare. If you've seen the film Sicko, there's a confession from Linda Pino in it. She talks about how she was paid. She denied a man an operation that could have saved his life, and thus caused his death, she says. And she was rewarded financially for that. And she ended up getting a 6-figure salary. It's managed care hearing in Congress. That's what that was. It's the same system we're talking about. And they've changed the name quite a few times, but that's how it works. And what that does, it pays local bodies like the local bodies where Bonnie's local hospital is, to reduce the service. She says in her confession, she says, I was constantly being told I was not denying care, I was just denying the money, but ultimately they're denying the care. And by shrinking what's a state provision, they're creating this big space, like we see in outsourcing all those beds and so on and so on. So that's what that system is. And a lot of people who work in it today may not quite, they've certainly not been told it in those terms, but they do know that they get rewards, and they have financial risks, just like a business, in that they can lose out if they don't manage to reduce the spending from their budget. And so this was a Labour policy. When Labour talks about integration, except if there are MPs who don't know what it's about, they're talking about Kaiser Permanente's integrated care, accountable care, just as much as when the Tories talk about it, they're talking about Kaiser Permanente's system of cuts for cash.
It's funny how things come full circle back to lack of opposition, then, really, isn't it? Because I mean,
it certainly does. Yeah.
The front bench in NHS terms is largely nodding through what the Tories are doing and not making a great deal of noise about why it's a problem. So, Alan, you were involved in health as part of the Socialist Health Association. Give us your input on that, please.
I mean, the point was, my wife is sitting next to me and she was nodding away because she's an ex-nurse. And I mean, I think when you talked about the Royal Liverpool Hospital, you can see exactly what's at stake, because the Carillion boss, Philip Green, not the Philip Green with a yacht, though this Philip Green might have a yacht, but he was actually the Tories' business morality czar. I mean, you could not write this up. People, and I think, both of our colleagues just talking, I think it's magisterial the way that Nick and Kailash talked, is there's a nightmare vision if these are the people in charge of our health service. And Labour, it's not just about differentiating. Labour has got to be fully, like Bonnie said, for an integrated, fully public service. If we don't have that, then these morality czars will carry through the immoral selling off of a health service that communities like mine and Bonnie's in South London and Manchester, where I used to live, we used to be proud, and I was living in Manchester, the MRI, we're fiercely proud of Zackley Hospital up the road. And we need these places. Our communities have poorer health because of the conditions of life, don't have the money to go into a private care system. I don't want to see a two-class health service. We have got to be fighting for its very existence. And Labour, if Labour can't be the voice of that fight, what is it? What the heck is it?
I think that kind of shows how crucial it is that we, that the Labour movement gets the Labour Party right, because it's not, as with the pandemic, the primary guilt lies with the Tories. They're the ones failing to take decisions or putting in actions that are causing, driving up infection rates and causing more deaths. But Keir Starmer's, no ifs, no buts, and various other kind of failures to oppose on policy have contributed to the level of horror that we're seeing. And similarly, similarly with the NHS, we're seeing the lack of opposition on the NHS allowed the Tories again to start building up towards, the latest attempt to manufacture a crisis, as Naomi Klein would put it, and then exploit that to line their own pockets and that of their backers. So, Howard, do you want to come in on that? And we'll.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Steve, you're spot on. The role of an opposition matters in a democracy, and this is why the strategy of saying nothing until there's an election is morally so vacant, and more so at a time of crisis. Labour has a responsibility to show the alternative, so as people understand that there is an alternative. And if you can't make that out after COVID, then God help you, because if you can't after COVID point to people to say how vital it is that we have an NHS system that is exactly what it says in the tin, free at the point of service and servicing people, then there's no future for you in respect of politics if you cannot make the arguments whenever people have literally died in order to keep the nations going. You have to be able to step up as a leader of the opposition. And I'm taken by, Kailish's point in respect to the vaccinations. We need to be singing that as loudly as possible, that the vaccinations have worked because of the NHS. And if you continue to reduce down the capacity of the NHS, then the next time there's a similar pandemic, there will not be a vaccination system that can get us out of it. And obviously, Nico's point, you can just water that down to say that this model is premised on less care equals more profit. There's only two ways to profiteer from the NHS: either provide less care or diminish the terms and conditions of workers. And hey ho, they're doing both of them, and Labour needs to shine a light on it.
And another thing, perhaps a very practical point in my view, is once this COVID is over, the biggest casualties of COVID are going to be economy and NHS. And both being actually, in my view, Boris Johnson has absolutely made mess with both economy as well as NHS. But the truth is that the practical point, you got to look at it, by and large, general public is never going to trust us easily on economy, but they trust us on NHS. And if we let this NHS card also go and let Boris Johnson play that card of NHS also, that he is doing best for the NHS, where would we be? I think
good question.
We've got to look at it.
Bonnie?
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to say, the thing we need to remember is a lot of this parcelling off of our NHS is about making it attractive to private companies to make a profit. Things like A&E, which are high risk, high cost, will never be attractive to these insurance companies. But what will be attractive are, things like hip replacements, knee replacements, those sort of things. So what we're going to see is a hollowing out of the more cost-effective treatments for people to the private services, and the emergency key services being left for people in a real cash-strapped service. And the more we're spending on outsourcing, funding is important, I agree, Kailash, but what's important as well is where that funding goes. And if that funding is going to line the pockets of the shareholders in privatized health providers or health insurance companies, which we're moving far too quickly towards, as far as I'm concerned, then there's going to be less money left in the pot for everybody else. And, it's got to be called out. I don't think we can wait till the next general election, whenever that may be, because hospitals are closing and being downgraded now, today, and we need to be making a big fuss about it.
I think that's the key thing, is making a fuss. one thing is clear, and it's been clear from the coverage this weekend of Boris Johnson's plans for the NHS. The so-called mainstream media are never going to actually tell people what is really going on and what it's all about. So, you know, we're playing a tiny part on socialist telly and as individual campaigners to try to raise awareness of this. But anybody watching this, share this out, get people aware, pick your bits, you know, feel free to clip parts of this, share it out to whoever you want, get the word out, because yet again, the massive NHS scam is going on. And sadly, at the moment, the media, neither the media nor the Labour Party are going to be making the noise about it that it should. And the only people on the ground that are really fighting for that are the Labour activists and the unions. So I'm going to give the very last word on the programme to Howard to round off on that and tell us what people can do in practical terms.
Well, listen, Steve, you've hit it completely, that we need to be supporting these alternative media messages. The sad thing after the first wave of COVID was that we very quickly lost the narrative. So at a time when people really did feel that you could not have a change in society other than one that respected those people who put themselves in the front line, risked their lives, very quickly we moved back to the norm after the first wave, and people forgot the sacrifice that working people had made. We have to find alternative mediums now as a movement. We have to support these alternative mediums because we have to get the message of truth out there. And we have to be able to say that those people who did put their lives at risk, those people who've come through this crisis and brought our nations through this crisis, deserve a new deal. And Steve, I'll just finish with this by saying that it was after the Second World War, at a time when nobody foresaw it, that people returned and said, no, we demand a social state, we demand an NHS, we demand that our children be allowed to go to third-tier education, and we will accept nothing less. And people would never have thought that possible in 1938, but there it was in 1946 being demanded. And it's that same spirit now that us as a movement have to demand from all of us, and we have to use social media to get the message out.
Fantastic. Well, on that word, we'll end the programme. So I really thank everybody for taking part, and thank you everybody who's watching. Feel free to share this on any of the platforms where it's going out, which will be Twitter, Facebook and YouTube at a minimum. And we'll see you on next week's Skwawk Talk. Keep watching social.